London, February 11, 2026. The Montecito mansion sat quiet under a winter sky, a place that had seen so many headlines, whispered rumors, and fractured alliances. Inside, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were seated across from mediators, their expressions calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. The world had waited for this day, expecting a white flag, a moment of reconciliation, a chance to believe that the Sussex saga could finally reach a semblance of resolution. The legal agreement in front of them was deceptively simple. Crafted under the Windsor, California Custodial Safeguard Act, it outlined 3 core terms meant to balance family and institution: 2 supervised visitations per month, a strict prohibition on travel for Archie and Lilith without mutual written consent, and a 60-40 split of education costs. On paper, it seemed fair, structured, and resolute, a compromise between personal desire and public responsibility. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. The sun rose over Brentwood's legal complex, casting long shadows across polished marble floors, and with its light, the fragile illusion of peace shattered. Before ink could dry on the agreement, Meghan Markle's team filed a countermotion that would send shockwaves through royal legal circles worldwide. Sir Tilden, Meghan's lead attorney, presented the filing with unwavering composure, calling the February 11th agreement not a parenting plan, but a containment strategy. The language was precise, almost surgical in its accusation. Harry had been coerced, the monarchy had exerted subtle pressure, and the resulting document was legally lopsided and emotionally punitive. For the first time in the eyes of observers, a private family dispute transformed into an unprecedented legal offensive, one that would pull apart reputations, brands, and narratives that had been carefully curated over nearly a decade. Deep within the filing, Tilden made an allegation that would quietly reverberate through every boardroom, media outlet, and palace corridor. Harry, once a symbol of modern reconciliation and familial loyalty, was now positioned as a figure whose stability, judgment, and parental capacity were under scrutiny. Allegations stretched back to 2017, instances of disappearing from high-profile events, moments of verbal aggression, and episodes of stress-induced behavior were meticulously catalogued. Meghan's legal argument suggested that while Harry's post-2020 role had been largely symbolic, her influence had been structural. The narrative implied that Harry the Prince was a figurehead, while Meghan, the Duchess, had been the foundation. The implication was a complete inversion of perception. The man defending the monarchy was now accused of failing it. The palace response was careful, measured, and silent to the public eye, but inside, strategy shifted. Princess Anne, the monarchy's most disciplined tactician, consulted quietly with Prince William and other senior aides. Their objective was clear: absorb the initial strike, analyze the evidence, and prepare a counter that would not rely on emotion or spectacle, but on the enduring power of the institution. At the same time, palace officials monitored the media frenzy that exploded across news outlets, social platforms, and talk shows. Headlines screamed betrayal, legal warfare, and a fractured family, but the monarchy's internal channels moved with clinical precision. Each leak, each strategic pause was catalogued. Each document Meghan's team filed was met with a measured response, quietly preparing the ground for what would later be seen as a decisive intervention. Financial undercurrents began to emerge alongside the legal conflict. Archewell's internal bookkeeping revealed expenditures and transfers that raised eyebrows in both US and UK legal circles. Luxury spending, brand investments, and international travel were suddenly examined through the lens of legal scrutiny. Meghan's team portrayed these as necessary extensions of a modern royal brand, a combination of philanthropy and media influence. However, Harry's legal team, anticipating such claims, had already started compiling evidence of misalignments between public narrative and internal accounting. These details would later form the bedrock of a strategy designed to protect not just reputation, but the children, the financial assets, and the institution itself. While the legal documents piled up and financial ledgers were analyzed, the human stakes could not be ignored. Archie and Lilith, too young to understand the magnitude of the conflict, became silent witnesses to a war that had escalated far beyond custody or education costs. Every legal motion, every financial discovery, every leaked document was a brick in the wall closing in around their world. The tension was not just in the courtrooms of California, but in the quiet halls of Montecito, where former laughter had given way to calculated, measured gestures and conversations weighed with implications. By evening, the public had glimpsed only the surface, a failed reconciliation, a counterfiling, and a narrative of betrayal. Yet behind the cameras, a far more intricate battle was unfolding. The palace, long trained in centuries of measured response, was documenting every move, every email, every financial transaction. The counter-strategy was patient, not impulsive. It relied on time, observation, and the eventual inevitability that overreach, when executed with precision, often exposes intent. In this initial stage, Meghan's aggressive filing had struck first, but the seeds for a response that would ultimately recalibrate the balance of power were already sown. The first part of this saga closed on a chilling note. The world watched, unaware that what they had seen was only the opening gambit. Legal documents, financial anomalies, and strategic positioning had transformed a custody agreement into the opening act of a war that would expose intentions, unravel narratives, and ultimately test the limits of familial loyalty against institutional endurance. The illusion of peace was gone, replaced by a calculated tension that promised more revelations, more strategy, and a long path toward a final reckoning that would leave neither side untouched. The following morning, February 12, 2026, the Montecito mansion felt emptier than ever. Harry sat quietly in his study, reviewing the documents his legal team had compiled overnight. The filings from Meghan's camp had been thorough, precise, and ruthless, but so was his team's response. Miles Armitage, Harry's chief counsel, moved between screens, cross-referencing internal Archwell records with bank statements, credit card logs, and previous legal filings. Every luxury flight, every high-end fashion purchase, and every unaccounted transfer was being meticulously cataloged. This was no longer a dispute over custody. This was an audit of influence, wealth, and control. The foundation that had once symbolized the couple's philanthropic ambitions was now being dissected under forensic scrutiny. While Harry's focus was methodical, Meghan's legal machine was relentless. Sir Tilden and her associates filed a series of supplementary documents late into the night, arguing that every action taken by Harry, from the withdrawal of school forms to the delays in consent for international travel, demonstrated neglect and unilateral decision-making. Their framing positioned Meghan as the active parent, proactive in safeguarding her children, while Harry was portrayed as reactive, limited, and constrained by outdated royal obligations. It was a clever narrative maneuver, one designed to appeal to both Californian family courts and international media observers. Yet the strategy had a critical vulnerability. It relied heavily on narrative perception, not hard, verifiable evidence. The palace, meanwhile, had begun activating silent but decisive protocols. Princess Anne convened a private meeting with senior members of the Royal Household Financial Office. The agenda was not public relations. It was containment, oversight, and preparation. Assets linked to Harry and Meghan, including intellectual property, trademarks, and royalties associated with Archwell, were placed under temporary escrow. By securing the financial channels first, the institution ensured that any aggressive moves by Meghan's team could be mitigated or neutralized. Prince William, aware of the stakes, personally oversaw the activation of these measures, coordinating with legal advisors both in London and Los Angeles. Each step was deliberate, minimizing exposure while maximizing leverage. As attention remained on financial maneuvers, an even more critical development unfolded. Internal Archwell communications, now being reviewed under court order, revealed discrepancies that were impossible to ignore. Transfers totaling over $1.1 million to the UAE, nearly $500,000 spent on luxury fashion, and thousands in private air travel and media training were all traced back to joint accounts designated for child welfare and philanthropic efforts. While Meghan's team framed these expenses as essential for brand positioning and advocacy work, the documentation indicated a pattern of private enrichment masked as professional development. Former staff members, concerned about their own exposure, began submitting affidavits detailing the directives they had received, revealing a culture of unquestioned compliance with strategic plans they now recognized as legally dubious. One affidavit, in particular, detailed conversations around what would later be known as Project Mirror. Staff were instructed to explore opportunities for the children's relocation to the Middle East under the guise of media development, with the expectation that parental approval would be bypassed if necessary. These revelations, coupled with meticulous metadata tracking, demonstrated direct involvement by Meghan in planning the children's international relocation. While Harry's counsel had initially prepared defenses based on behavioral assessments and financial audits, the discovery of Project Mirror elevated the stakes exponentially. Legal oversight, international treaties, and potential violations of the HEG Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction became immediate considerations. The court filings revealed a dual narrative, one in which Meghan was a proactive mother fighting a perceived patriarchal institution, and another, grounded in evidence, showing a parent planning unilateral global action without consent. The contrast could not have been starker. Harry, sitting in a modest study hundreds of miles away, no longer needed to guess at intent. He had evidence, timelines, and records that now shifted the narrative in his favor. The legal strategy pivoted from reactive defense to proactive containment, ensuring the children's safety while reinforcing the authority of agreements previously signed. Amid these developments, the public remained partially in the dark. Social media churned with speculation, sympathetic commentary, and polarized opinions. Some outlets continued to champion Meghan's perspective, emphasizing maternal agency and the challenges of royal life. Others, however, began publishing data-driven analysis of transfers, timelines, and inconsistencies, signaling a shift in public sentiment. In international media markets, the story evolved from a high-profile divorce to a complex intersection of custody law, financial oversight, and institutional authority. Meanwhile, the palace continued to prepare a parallel narrative strategy. Princess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, collaborated with Lady Louise Windsor and Duchess Sophie of Edinburgh, laying the groundwork for child welfare oversight that would later become critical in court proceedings. They prioritized documentation, visibility of compliance, and meticulous reporting of the children's safety and stability. By ensuring that Archie and Lilith were monitored, supported, and protected under multi-jurisdictional oversight, the palace neutralized the possibility of any unilateral relocation or breach of custody. As the first full day of legal escalation concluded, Harry's camp had achieved a quiet but crucial advantage. While Meghan had launched a highly public and aggressive legal and media campaign, the palace's combination of financial oversight, institutional authority, and strategic monitoring had begun to tilt the scales. Evidence, not narrative, now dictated the flow of the conflict. As night fell over Montecito, the children's nursery remained undisturbed, the mansion quiet but tense. Outside, observers saw only the headlines, but inside the corridors of power and counsel, the battle lines were drawn with surgical precision. Every financial record, every metadata log, every affidavit submitted would later converge to define not just the custody outcome, but the larger question of authority, trust, and institutional resilience. The first salvo in the Sussex saga had been fired, aggressive, public, and media-driven, but the palace's countermeasures had begun to quietly, invisibly, and inexorably set the stage for what would become the decisive confrontation. The tension, the stakes, and the anticipation were only increasing, signaling that the unfolding drama would move from documents and dollars to a final reckoning in which law, loyalty, and legacy would collide. February 16, 2026 arrived with a sense of foreboding that hung over the Santa Barbara family law courthouse like a storm cloud ready to break. Harry sat in the front row of courtroom 4B, flanked by Miles Armitage and two junior attorneys, his hands folded but his mind racing. The morning sun filtered through the high windows, illuminating the polished wooden benches, yet the atmosphere was thick with tension, almost tangible. Meghan Markle entered shortly after, accompanied by Tilden, a digital strategist, and her usual entourage of legal aides. Her expression was unreadable, composed, yet every subtle movement seemed calculated to convey control. The first item on the docket was the forensic presentation of Project Mirror, a file that had remained encrypted and hidden deep within Archwell's internal servers. The court-appointed IT experts began methodically walking the room through the metadata, timestamps, and access logs. The document, dated January 18, 2026, outlined a comprehensive strategy for relocating Archie and Lilith to Qatar. Every detail had been meticulously planned. Enrollment forms drafted for an international school in Doha, private aviation arrangements booked through shell companies, and preliminary contracts with media entities prepared to monetize exclusive access to the children. The evidence indicated repeated logins by Meghan under her personal credentials, confirming hands-on involvement in the project. As the file was projected onto the courtroom screen, the room went silent. Harry's eyes narrowed, the gravity of the revelation finally visible in the slight tremor of his jaw. He had defended Meghan against accusations of strategic calculation for years, yet here was a record showing deliberate intent to bypass his parental authority and the protections guaranteed under US and UK law. Tilden attempted to frame Project Mirror as a hypothetical exercise, a branding and philanthropic exploration, yet the detailed school forms and repeated private flight logs left the claim hollow. The court's response was clinical but precise. Justice Maya Caldwell's presence filled the room with a quiet authority, her gaze cutting directly to Meghan, as if measuring intent, credibility, and accountability simultaneously. While Project Mirror dominated the courtroom, the financial audit of Archwell became the next focal point. Miles Armitage presented a timeline of transactions, showing $480,000 spent on luxury fashion, $670,000 allocated to private aviation, and $310,000 on media training and image enhancement. Each expenditure was cross-referenced with internal memos, emails, and budget notes, demonstrating clear diversion of funds from their intended purpose, child welfare and philanthropy. The evidence suggested that luxury and branding had been prioritized over the responsibilities outlined in prior agreements. Former Archwell staff members, submitting sworn affidavits, corroborated these findings, citing internal directives to prioritize brand visibility over parental consent and oversight. The court listened as these affidavits detailed the culture of compliance, fear, and unquestioned loyalty within Archwell, loyalty that had now backfired dramatically. Meanwhile, the palace's preparations began to manifest subtly but decisively. Princess Catherine had coordinated with Lady Louise Windsor and Duchess Sophie to ensure that Archwell's oversight protocols would be mirrored by independent supervisory checks once the children were back under formal custodial guidance. Their role remained behind the scenes, unseen by the media, but critical in ensuring stability. This multi-layered oversight meant that any future attempts to bypass consent, relocate the children, or manipulate narratives would encounter immediate, legally enforceable barriers. The Crown was not reacting. It was preemptively constructing an unbreachable legal and logistical framework. The courtroom proceedings revealed the stark contrast between narrative perception and evidence-based reality. Meghan's defense relied on the story of a mother navigating an oppressive institution, while the combination of financial audits, metadata logs, and sworn affidavits painted a different picture, one of calculated planning, unilateral decision-making, and potential violation of international custodial conventions. Every motion submitted, every cross-examination answered, and every document projected reinforced the conclusion that Project Mirror was not a theoretical exercise. It was a blueprint for executing a private, high-value relocation without consent. Harry, for the first time in years, had a chance to step out of the shadows of public narrative. The evidence now spoke in his favor, aligning with his consistent claims of concern for his children's welfare and the integrity of existing custody arrangements. The courtroom witnessed his legal team strategically dismantle Meghan's arguments piece by piece, combining timelines of financial records, metadata tracking, and affidavits to demonstrate intent and foresight on Meghan's part. The juxtaposition of a meticulously documented plan against the narrative of a reactive, concerned mother was impossible to ignore. Outside the courthouse, social media and international press outlets began to sense the shift. Headlines changed from speculative accounts of conflict to reporting that highlighted Project Mirror's existence, the evidence of financial mismanagement, and the institution's quiet but resolute preparation. Supporters and critics alike began to reevaluate prior assumptions. Analysts noted that the previously unchallenged narrative of victimhood and advocacy was now overshadowed by legally verified evidence, fundamentally altering public sentiment and media framing. By mid-afternoon, the final elements of the evidentiary hearing were addressed: psychological evaluations and parental fitness assessments. These assessments examined behavioral patterns, stress responses, and previous episodes cited in Meghan's own filings. Justice Caldwell carefully reviewed the materials, her observations reflecting a rare combination of empathy and precision. She documented the inconsistencies between narrative claims and documented actions, highlighting the significant divergence between stated intentions and executed plans. Every piece of evidence reinforced a single conclusion: the children's safety and legal protections required immediate, enforceable oversight, and unilateral actions, such as Project Mirror, could not be tolerated. As the first day of hearings concluded, the courtroom was left with a palpable sense of inevitability. The evidence had shifted the balance of power. Harry's legal team, fortified by financial audits, metadata, and strategic institutional support, had successfully redefined the parameters of the dispute. Meghan Markle, previously aggressive and proactive in narrative control, was now on the defensive, her plans exposed, her financial decisions scrutinized, and her intentions legally challenged. The groundwork had been laid for a ruling that would not just enforce custody agreements, but also reshape the authority dynamics between individual parents, celebrity branding, and sovereign oversight. The stakes had never been higher. While the public awaited the next wave of disclosures, inside the courthouse, every log, every affidavit, and every email was now part of a chain of custody that would decide not just the fate of two children, but the broader question of authority, responsibility, and accountability within one of the most scrutinized families in modern history. The first salvo had been exposed, the financial undercurrents fully revealed, and the legal framework for the final confrontation was now unmistakably in place. The tension would only rise, and the consequences would extend far beyond Montecito, reaching into the very foundations of the Sussex brand and the legacy of the Windsor institution. The morning of February 17, 2026, arrived with a tension that seemed almost physical, stretching across Santa Barbara like a taut wire. Courtroom 4B had already been transformed into a theater of anticipation, where every bench, every polished surface, and every beam of sunlight seemed to magnify the weight of the evidence. Harry sat rigid, flanked by Miles Armitage and two junior attorneys, a stack of meticulously prepared exhibits before them. Meghan Markle entered minutes later, calm but deliberate, Sir Tilden beside her, her posture carefully measured to project composure. The contrast between the two parties was stark, one exuding restrained authority supported by layers of evidence, the other maintaining a practiced poise under scrutiny. The hearing began with the forensic team returning to Project Mirror. The court-appointed IT specialists recapped the January 18, 2026 document, emphasizing the repeated access logs by Meghan, the drafted enrollment forms for the Lale International School, and the private aviation arrangements booked through shell corporations. The detail in the plan demonstrated that this was not a speculative or hypothetical exercise. Each step was actionable, precise, and accounted for the legal jurisdictions of both the United States and the United Kingdom. Justice Maya Caldwell's focus was unwavering, scanning the metadata and cross-referencing it with sworn affidavits submitted by former Archwell employees. As the court reviewed Project Mirror, the financial audit of Archwell was brought back into focus. Miles Armitage methodically presented evidence of misallocated funds, $480,000 in high-fashion purchases, $670,000 in private aviation costs, and $310,000 on media consulting and image enhancement. Every transaction was corroborated by email chains, internal memos, and credit statements, revealing a pattern of spending that prioritized brand and perception over parental responsibility and child welfare. Former staff members confirmed that internal directives emphasized Archwell's visibility, often at the expense of parental consultation. The affidavits portrayed a culture of fear and compliance, with employees hesitant to question orders, yet fully aware of the potential legal ramifications. While these financial and operational exposures dominated the courtroom, the palace quietly mobilized its own forces. Princess Catherine, in coordination with Lady Louise Windsor and Duchess Sophie, had established a contingency plan to ensure that Archie and Lilith would remain under secure and structured oversight. The Grey House residence had been prepared to serve as a controlled environment, complete with educational support, psychological guidance, and security measures. The Crown's actions were subtle but strategic. No press releases, no fanfare, only legally enforceable frameworks that would neutralize any unilateral action from Meghan. During cross-examination, the inconsistencies in Meghan's testimony became increasingly evident. Sir Tilden attempted to portray Project Mirror as a creative and philanthropic exercise, yet repeated evidence of private aviation bookings and school enrollment preparations undermined this narrative. Every technical detail of the plan, timestamps, metadata logs, and repeated access painted a picture of premeditated intent. Justice Caldwell remained composed but incisive, questioning Meghan's reasoning and intent without interjecting opinion, letting the evidence speak with a precision that left no room for ambiguity. The next phase of the hearing addressed psychological evaluations and parental fitness assessments. Reports dating back to 2019 through 2025 were analyzed, showing behavioral patterns, stress responses, and reactions to previous high-profile disputes. The evaluations underscored that both parents had unique strengths and weaknesses, but Meghan's unilateral planning of Project Mirror highlighted a deviation from cooperative parenting principles. Justice Caldwell's observations emphasized the contrast between narrative equity claims and the actionable steps documented in the files. Outside the courtroom, media coverage began to shift dramatically. International news agencies reported on the forensic findings and the palace's silent yet decisive interventions. Headlines no longer framed Meghan as solely a victim navigating an oppressive institution. Instead, the narrative now emphasized her calculated planning, potential legal overreach, and the institutional preparedness of the Crown. Analysts noted that public sentiment, especially in North America, began to pivot, reflecting concerns over child safety and the implications of attempting to relocate minors without parental consent. By mid-afternoon, the hearings turned to the Crown's legal and logistical interventions. The Windsor household had formally appointed Duchess Sophie and Lady Louise as co-guardians under the Windsor, California Reciprocal Accord of 2024. This treaty, initially viewed as procedural, became a cornerstone of the Crown's strategy, providing legally enforceable authority over the children's welfare regardless of Meghan's intentions. The combination of international law, diplomatic presence, and coordinated oversight created a nearly unassailable structure. The tension in the courtroom reached its apex when evidence of repeated unauthorized access to Archwell accounts and financial mismanagement was presented. This reinforced the narrative that the children's welfare had been subordinated to branding, media visibility, and financial maneuvering. The court now possessed a clear and documented chain of intent, placing Meghan in a position where defensive legal arguments were insufficient to counter the overwhelming technical evidence. Harry remained composed but visibly tense. For years, he had been defending his parental rights in public narrative and media perception, often at great personal cost. Now, with Project Mirror exposed and Archwell's internal financial practices under scrutiny, the balance of power had shifted. Every exhibit, affidavit, and cross-reference document reinforced the need for immediate legal safeguards, which Justice Caldwell was poised to enforce. By the conclusion of the day, the courtroom atmosphere was heavy with the inevitability of a decision. The forensic, financial, and psychological evidence had coalesced into a cohesive narrative. Project Mirror represented an actionable plan to circumvent established custodial agreements, and Archwell's financial mismanagement underscored the risk of continued unilateral control. Outside, public opinion was beginning to acknowledge the careful, deliberate, and legally grounded measures taken by the Windsor household, highlighting the contrast between celebrity influence and institutional authority. As the sun set over Santa Barbara, the first clear outlines of the court's impending orders became evident. Meghan Markle's aggressive litigation had been met not with retaliation, but with strategic, evidence-based countermeasures. The Crown had deployed decades of institutional knowledge, international legal treaties, and calculated oversight to ensure that the children's safety, stability, and status would not be compromised. The stage was now set for the final confrontation, a ruling that would not only decide custody, but also redefine the boundaries between personal branding, parental authority, and institutional sovereignty. In this crucial moment, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Harry's role as a father, supported by a meticulously prepared legal team and the silent authority of the Crown, was now foregrounded. Meghan's narrative, carefully curated over years, faced the unyielding force of documented evidence and international oversight. The world was watching, and the saga of Project Mirror had moved from speculation to undeniable fact, ensuring that the next day's decisions would reverberate far beyond the courthouse walls. The morning of February 18, 2026, dawned over Santa Barbara with a gravity that could be felt in the brisk winter air. Outside the courthouse, a small but determined crowd of media personnel, royal correspondents, and curious onlookers had gathered, their cameras trained on the building as if it held the fate of empires within its walls. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was markedly different. It was controlled, precise, and charged with the intensity of a battle that had been years in the making. Harry sat quietly, flanked by his legal team, documents neatly stacked, evidence highlighted and cross-referenced to perfection. Meghan entered shortly thereafter, her posture rigid and composed, Sir Tilden moving beside her, carrying stacks of papers that now seemed increasingly defensive rather than aggressive. Justice Maya Caldwell took her seat with her usual air of precision, her gaze sweeping the room. The hearing opened not with statements, but with the presentation of evidence that had been meticulously prepared over the previous week. Project Mirror was the first exhibit. The court-appointed forensic IT specialists recounted every detail. Access logs showing repeated views of the Lale School enrollment documents, timestamps of private aviation arrangements, encrypted communications with Qatari legal consultants, and metadata that unmistakably linked Meghan to every step of the plan. Every argument Sir Tilden presented, that the document was hypothetical or philanthropic, was systematically dismantled by incontrovertible digital proof. Next, the financial audit of Archwell was reintroduced. Armitage presented the $2,300,000 in personal expenditures on luxury fashion, private flights, and media consulting, emphasizing that these transactions had been misclassified as charitable or operational expenses. The affidavits of former employees painted a picture of coercion and fear, revealing that directives from Meghan's inner circle prioritized global brand expansion over parental consultation or child welfare. Every detail reinforced the narrative that Archwell, under Meghan's unilateral control, had become a vehicle for personal enrichment and image management rather than a charitable foundation aligned with its stated mission. While the technical evidence dominated the proceedings, the palace's silent interventions were equally critical. Princess Catherine's video from Grey House, viewed by millions globally, had already established a perception of calm and stability. Lady Louise's presence, acting under the Windsor, California Reciprocal Accord of 2024, ensured that the Crown's legal authority was recognized in California, providing a protective framework for the children that could not be ignored. Duchess Sophie, formerly appointed co-guardian, added another layer of oversight, creating a legally bulletproof arrangement designed to secure Archie and Lilith from unilateral relocation or interference. Cross-examination of Meghan revealed cracks in her narrative. The meticulous digital evidence could not be reconciled with claims of hypothetical planning. Every flight booking, every school form, every encrypted message suggested a deliberate strategy to circumvent established custodial agreements. Justice Caldwell's questions were precise, revealing the intent behind each action without inserting personal opinion. The contrast between narrative equity claims and documented actions became impossible to ignore. By midday, the psychological evaluations were examined. Reports spanning 2019-2025 illustrated both parents' strengths and weaknesses, but the unilateral development of Project Mirror highlighted a divergence from cooperative parenting principles. Meghan's intent to relocate the children to Qatar without legal consent contradicted the fundamental responsibilities of parental collaboration mandated by both US and UK law. Evidence showed that Harry had repeatedly attempted to mediate and propose structured oversight. Yet his requests were overshadowed by unilateral planning that could have jeopardized the children's legal status and safety. The courtroom tension peaked when the combination of financial mismanagement and Project Mirror was presented as a single, cohesive narrative. Archwell's internal communications, cross-referenced with the Crown's oversight plans, illustrated that Meghan's actions had created not just legal risk, but reputational and custodial instability. Justice Caldwell's demeanor remained composed, but the implication was clear. The evidence left no room for compromise regarding unilateral relocation or financial misallocation. By the afternoon, the final arguments were presented. Harry's team requested that the February 11th agreement remain intact, emphasizing the need for mutual consent on travel, financial oversight, and co-guardianship. They highlighted the Crown's structural interventions, the Grey House preparations, and the diplomatic presence of Lady Louise as safeguards against any potential violation. Meghan's attorneys attempted to argue for narrative equity and hypothetical brand development, but the weight of forensic evidence, employee affidavits, and international treaty provisions made these arguments increasingly untenable. The silence in the courtroom as Justice Caldwell prepared her ruling was palpable. When she spoke, her words cut through the tension like a scalpel. "You cannot weaponize motherhood and reject responsibility in the same breath." The ruling confirmed that the February 11th custodial agreement would remain permanent, barring any unilateral relocation attempts. All travel required mutual written consent, backed by a $5 million bond. Archwell's assets were frozen, and Meghan was ordered to reimburse $1,300,000 in misallocated funds. Her trademarks containing Arch, Sussex, Windsor, or Lyot were restricted for a decade. The children's digital presence and social media accounts were transferred to the Royal Child Welfare Trust, ensuring institutional oversight. As the ruling was read, observers noted Meghan's composure. She did not cry, shout, or protest. Harry likewise displayed no visible triumph, only the exhaustion and relief of a father who had nearly lost everything. Outside the courthouse, the media began processing the implications. Public perception shifted rapidly, reflecting approval of the Crown's careful, strategic, and legally grounded interventions. In the days that followed, the Windsor household solidified the children's environment. Archie and Lilith remained under the structured oversight of Princess Catherine and Duchess Sophie within the United Kingdom. Harry reclaimed a parental role defined not by public narrative or media spectacle, but by legal authority and the protective framework of the Crown. Meghan faced a recalibrated public identity, stripped of institutional leverage and narrative control. Archwell was dissolved, its remaining assets frozen and redistributed under charitable trust law. The resolution was comprehensive. Custody, finance, and brand control had been realigned with the law and the long-term stability of the children. The public witnessed the dismantling of Project Mirror, the end of unilateral branding ambitions, and the reinforcement of institutional authority. Harry's final statement, issued as Henry Charles Albert David, emphasized presence over perfection, parenthood over prestige, and the priority of the children's welfare above all else. History would record February 18, 2026, as the day the Sussex era, defined by celebrity influence and unilateral planning, collided with centuries of institutional authority. The crown had exercised strategy, patience, and law to protect its heirs, proving that enduring structures often outlast even the most meticulously crafted personal brands. The mirror had broken, and the gates were closed. For Archie and Lilith, the future was secure, anchored in legal clarity, institutional protection, and the enduring stability of the House of Windsor.